All right, ready to jump into indigenous rights in Honduras? We've got this pretty hefty report, actually. It just came out in March 2024, and they use this thing called the Indigenous Navigator framework.
Oh, yeah, that framework's really important. It helps us, get past just what the laws say and actually look at how things are working out for specific communities. Like in this case, they zeroed in on the Lenca, Peck, and Tulupan peoples.
Which, hang on a sec, those are just three of the groups that are, like, officially recognized in Honduras, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely not the whole picture. 9 groups have that recognition officially, but even that's, it's kind of in flux. Like,
Mm.
the report mentions the Corotega. They see themselves as indigenous, but the government doesn't give them that
Oh,
status.
interesting.
And then you've got the Nahuas who just got that recognition, so things are changing.
So, okay, right off the bat, we're seeing this kind of disconnect, right, between how the government defines indigenous and like what's actually happening on the ground. But even when we try to measure how these groups are doing, the report kind of hits us with this data problem.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like, trying to figure out someone's health without knowing their blood type or something.
Yeah.
The 2013 census, it tells us that roughly 10% of Honduras identifies as indigenous. But without the government breaking that down further, it's really hard to say how they're actually doing compared to everyone else.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so we've got this backdrop of like it's complex, right? Yep. But Honduras has signed on to some key international agreements when it comes to indigenous rights, like ILO Convention 169, right?
They have, yeah. And you actually see that commitment reflected in their own constitution, which specifically says the state's got to protect indigenous communities, especially when it comes to their land and forests.
Mm-hmm.
And they go even further in their property law, where they clearly lay out collective land ownership rights.
So that's got to be a win, right?
Yeah.
They've got, what, over 1.3 million hectares of land titled to indigenous groups.
It's significant, no doubt. Like, it shows, at least on paper, that they get it, that historical connection to the land. But then the report points out this big thing that's missing. Honduras doesn't actually recognize the right to self-determination in their laws.
And doesn't that kind of make all these other rights, like, shaky? I mean, if you can't decide your own future, your political, economic, like social stuff.
Exactly. It really undermines the whole thing. And this tension becomes super clear when you look at the actual experiences of the Lenca, Peck, and Tulupan communities. Let's just take land rights as a starting point. All 3 have secured collective titles, which is huge.
Huge, yeah.
But
there's always a but, right? Like, this is where the report gets really interesting because it shows this disconnect. They legally own the land, but
right. They own it, but it's constantly under threat. You see illegal settlements popping up, people extracting resources without their permission, just a total lack of respect for their authority from outsiders who come in and kind of take over.
So they're always having to defend what's rightfully theirs.
Basically, yeah.
And the report gives this, it's a striking example. It's the Tulupan community of Las Vegas to Tepemachim. They've held the title to their land since 1984. But these non-indigenous settlers, they call them Ladinos, have moved in and started dividing up the land, like completely disregarding the tribe's authority.
And it's even gotten violent, Indigenous leaders have been attacked just for trying to assert their rights. It kind of makes you wonder, what good is a piece of paper if it can't even protect you?
Yeah, seriously. And it's not even just about the land itself, right? It's about like what it represents, that cultural connection. And the report's not too optimistic on that front either.
Not really. We're seeing languages just vanish. Like the Lenca language is considered extinct, while Tol and Pech are, they're critically endangered. Younger generations just aren't speaking them fluently anymore.
That's so sad. And I remember the report mentioned that like the state is pushing for bilingual education, but the Lenca language is gone. Like, how does that even work?
It's a huge disconnect. Either these programs are just not effective or they're not designed in a way that actually helps, And it's not just language. You see cultural appropriation happening all over. Like traditions, they're stripped of their meaning and basically exploited.
Right, like the report talks about Lenca weaving, how it's become this generic national symbol of Honduras. It's on everything, even clothes worn by like politicians and TV people. But it's done without any respect for what it actually means to the Lenca people. It's almost like saying, we love your culture, but only as like a cute little accessory.
Exactly. And there's another example with the pitch. They feel like outsiders are stealing their traditional seeds, using them for commercial sale. It's this constant theme. Indigenous culture isn't respected for what it is, something unique and worth protecting on its own terms.
So, okay, they're facing threats to their land, their culture, and like To top it all off, the report brings up food insecurity. All three communities said they go through months of not having enough food, especially between June and September.
Which is kind of wild when you think about it. They have legally recognized land rights, but it seems like there's a disconnect between owning the land and being able to, actually use it to grow food sustainably.
So even with the land, there are these deeper problems that are stopping them from thriving. What are some of the other barriers that the report identifies?
Well, access to justice is a big one. It's really hard for these communities to get legal help when they need it.
Like what kinds of things make it so hard?
Yeah. Well, their own customary law isn't recognized by the legal system. There's not much legal aid available. And then you have the language barriers, making it near impossible to navigate the courts. And of course, there's always discrimination and not having enough money to afford legal help. It's kind of like the system is designed to keep them out.
And I bet that lack of access to justice probably makes it even harder to get proper political representation too, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are some indigenous people in office, but these communities as a whole feel like nobody's speaking for them, Not at the national level and not at the local level either. The report quotes one resident of Las Vegas, the Tepemarin. They were talking about a legal case, and they said the prosecutor was on the side of the person who did the crime. There wasn't even a report filed. Like, it shows you how deep this feeling goes, that the system is corrupt and it's biased against them.
It's like they're being silenced at every level.
Yeah.
But hey, at least they've got access to healthcare and education.
Right. Well, that's where things get even more complicated.
Okay, I think I hear another but coming. We should probably dive into all that after a quick break. We'll be right back.
Okay, so we were talking about healthcare and education. On paper, Honduras guarantees those rights, but I'm guessing it's not quite that straightforward in reality.
You guessed right. Access is a major, major issue. Take education, for instance. The state says they're all about bilingual education, but, with Lenka gone and Toll and Patch barely hanging on.
It's kind of like they're trying to teach something that's already vanished, right?
Oh,
Talk about a disconnect.
Seriously, either of those programs just aren't working or they're not designed in a way that actually helps these communities. And when it comes to healthcare, forget about it. The report says most health centers are super hard to get to, both because of how far away they are and how much it costs to get there.
So for a lot of people, basic healthcare is just straight up out of reach.
Pretty much.
And then, adding insult to injury, the report says there's no specific health data for indigenous groups. We don't even know how bad things like child mortality or suicide rates really are. Exactly. We're missing key pieces of the puzzle, so it's that much harder to address the problems. It paints a pretty grim picture, but the good news is the report doesn't just leave us hanging. It lays out a whole roadmap for making things better. There are a bunch of recommendations that could really turn things around.
Okay, so let's get into those. What's the big idea?
Basically, the report says Honduras needs to totally change how it thinks about indigenous rights. It's not just about passing new laws or throwing money at the problem, though those are important. It's got to be a deeper shift in attitude.
So, less top-down control and more respect for their right to choose their own future.
Exactly. And that respect needs to be built into everything the government does, from creating policies to actually putting them into practice. One of the big recommendations is using what they call an ethnic differential approach.
Okay. Break that down for us. What does that even mean?
Well, it means recognizing that indigenous communities, that's not just one big group, right? They have different cultures, different ways of doing things, different economic situations. So solutions can't be one size fits all. They got to be tailored to each community's needs.
So less like a cookie cutter, more like, I don't know, a tailor making a custom suit. Every piece has to be a perfect fit.
I like that, yeah. A perfect fit. And part of making that happen is actually letting indigenous people participate in the decision-making. Not just token consultations where they get to say their piece after everything's already decided. They got to have a real seat at the table.
You're making sure they're actually heard before decisions are made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that means giving them the resources they need to make that participation meaningful. Stuff like legal training, language support, even funding for projects they want to lead themselves. It's about empowering them, not just consulting them.
Gotcha. Empowerment, not just consultation. Makes sense. What about protecting their culture? What does the report say about that?
Well, it says Honduras needs to get serious about revitalizing those endangered languages and protecting cultural practices from being exploited. Things like language immersion programs, making sure traditional knowledge is documented, and actually enforcing laws against cultural appropriation.
But wouldn't it be good to encourage economic development that's tied to their culture? Like promoting traditional crafts and stuff.
Oh, for sure, it can be good, but it has to be done in a way that puts indigenous people in control. They get to decide how their culture is shared and who benefits. It's a balancing act between preserving tradition and promoting economic development.
So letting them call the shots, basically.
Exactly. The report also talks a lot about food insecurity. It suggests some long-term solutions, ways to tackle the root of the problem instead of just putting on band-aids.
Okay, like what?
Well, they say Honduras has to crack down on land grabbing, make sure communities have access to the resources they need to grow food, and figure out how to deal with the effects of climate change, which are hitting traditional food systems pretty hard.
So thinking about the bigger picture, the things that cause food insecurity in the first place, what about access to justice? Earlier, we talked about how messed up the system seems to be. How does the report say they can fix that?
They're pretty clear about it. Honduras has to completely overhaul its approach to justice for indigenous communities. That means training judges and lawyers so they actually understand indigenous rights, providing translation services so language isn't a barrier, and recognizing that customary law systems are legitimate.
So like changing the system from the ground up to make it more fair and inclusive.
Exactly. And it also means tackling that ingrained discrimination that makes it so hard for indigenous people to be heard and respected in court. Oh, and we can't forget about political representation. The report says they need way more indigenous people in government at all levels.
And not just like a few token representatives. Their perspectives need to be a central part of decision-making. What about personal safety? I remember the report mentioned that people who defend indigenous rights are often attacked or threatened.
Yeah, that's a huge concern. Protecting those folks is super important. The report stresses that Honduras has to take concrete steps to prevent those attacks, investigate them when they happen, and hold the people responsible accountable.
So creating a climate where that kind of violence is just not tolerated, that's a lot to take on.
It is, but the encouraging thing is all of these recommendations are rooted in that idea of self-determination. It's about recognizing that indigenous people have rights just because they exist, not because the state decides to give them those rights.
So this report isn't just a list of complaints, it's a call to action. But what about us, the people listening? We're not in Honduras. What can we do to help?
That's a great question. It's easy to feel like your actions don't matter when you're dealing with these huge, complex issues, but
every little bit helps, right?
exactly. And it all starts with education.
Yeah.
Learning about these issues, like really getting into it, the history, the systemic stuff that's led to indigenous people being pushed to the margins.
So like not just skimming headlines, but actually reading articles, reports like the one we're looking at, even podcasts like this one.
Exactly. And don't just stick to one side of the story. Find diverse voices, especially indigenous authors, activists, people who are living this.
Oh, that's a good point. And then don't just keep it to yourself, right?
Share it.
Have those conversations with friends, family, even if they're a little, uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes you got to get uncomfortable.
Share their stories, help amplify their voices. And if you hear someone saying something that's just like straight up wrong, call them out.
That's how we start changing things at the root level, one conversation at a time, shifting those perspectives.
And if you want to do even more, think about those organizations working on the ground.
Oh, yeah. There are so many incredible indigenous-led groups out there. You can donate, volunteer your time, your skills, whatever you're good at, or even just spread the word about what they're doing.
Put your money where your mouth is, right?
Yep. But it's not just about money. It's about the choices we make every day, too.
Oh, right.
Think about where the stuff you buy comes from. Support businesses that are doing things ethically, fair trade, especially the ones that work directly with indigenous communities.
So like voting with your wallet, kind of.
Yeah.
Supporting the companies that actually match your values.
Exactly. And then there's political action. That's huge.
Right.
Write to your representatives, put pressure on corporations to do better, support policies that actually protect indigenous rights, not just here, but globally.
So basically, use your voice, use your vote, make those empower, pay attention. It's about realizing that, like, indigenous rights, they aren't some separate thing over there. It's all connected to creating a world that's sustainable for everyone.
I think this deep dive has really driven that home for me. It's good that Honduras is taking some steps in the right direction, but there's such a gap between what the laws say and what's really happening.
It's clear that real change needs more than just, like, fancy words written down. It needs a total change in attitude. Like, really committing to respecting indigenous self-determination no matter what.
And that's something we can all be a part of, wherever we are. Learning, speaking up, making good choices. We can all help make that better future happen.
Well, I've definitely learned a ton from this deep dive. And it's got me thinking about so many other things, too. What about you, listener? What's stuck with you? What else do you want to learn about indigenous rights in Honduras or anywhere else? Keep those questions in your mind, and let's keep talking about this. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.